The first time the town went quiet, it was not when Helen Mercer stood in front of the demolition crew. That morning, people still laughed. They laughed at her faded nurse's coat. They laughed at the rusted tower rising behind the abandoned clinic. They laughed at the old microphone in her hand, as if a 76-year-old woman could stop the county with nothing but dead equipment and memory. The real silence came 2 nights later. It came after the storm had already dragged Pine Hollow Ridge into darkness. It came when the cell towers were down, when the ambulance could not find the mountain road, and when Helen finally opened the locked drawer beneath the radio console. Inside was not money. It was not a deed. It was not some sentimental letter from her dead husband. It was a stack of radio logs, each page marked with dates, call signs, storm notes, and names the county records said did not exist. 43 emergency calls, 43 families. 43 times the old tower had carried voices through snow, rain, and black mountain nights when no one else was listening. And beside those names were 2 initials Helen had spent half her life trusting. Evie, Dr. Elias Ward. But to understand why those initials broke her heart, you have to go back to the morning they came to tear the tower down. If stories about forgotten people, old promises, and the things the world was too quick to throw away mean something to you, consider subscribing, because what happened in Pine Hollow was not just about an old nurse, a dead radio tower, or one storm. It was about the voices a town almost erased. The county crew arrived before sunrise, with 2 trucks, a yellow lift, and a clipboard that already spoke louder than anyone on that hill. By noon, the radio tower was supposed to be gone. Helen Mercer waited at the locked gate in her old white nurse's coat. Once, that coat had meant help when Pine Hollow had no one else. Now, it looked like a relic people were tired of respecting. Behind her, Pine Hollow Clinic sat with boarded windows, peeling blue trim, and weeds pushing through the steps. Behind it, the tower rose thin against the ridge. It leaned just enough to look tired. Rust marked its braces. One antenna pointed wrong. To anyone driving past, it looked like scrap waiting for a torch. To Helen, it looked like the last thing in Pine Hollow that had not learned how to lie. Commissioner Dale Brackett stepped out in a county jacket over a pressed shirt. "Mrs. Mercer," Dale said, "we discussed this at the hearing." "No," Helen said. "You discussed it." "I listened." One worker turned away to hide a smile. Dale glanced at the chain. "The structure has been condemned. Ridgeline begins staging tomorrow. If that tower is standing, the county will be in violation." Helen looked at the yellow lift. "They sent a machine tall enough," she said. "That doesn't mean they sent a reason good enough." The worker laughed. Townspeople gathered near the road. A teenager raised his phone and started recording. Helen saw the phone. She did not look away. Dale lifted the paper. "Final removal order. If you refuse access, I am authorized to cut the lock." Helen's hand tightened around the old microphone. Years ago, Paul had painted Mercer Clinic Radio along the side. "Is she holding a microphone?" someone whispered. "For what? To talk to ghosts?" This time, the laugh spread. Helen breathed in slowly. She had heard worse. Men crying through static, mothers describing blood loss, a child gasping between his father's words. She looked at the tower and tried to hear Paul again. If they ever come for it, make them hear the names first. For 9 years, she had carried that sentence like a key-fitting no-lock. Dale followed her gaze. "Mrs. Mercer, I respect what this place meant to you, but the clinic is closed. The license expired. The radio system is obsolete. The new relay network covers the ridge. No system covers people it forgets," Helen said. Dale's face tightened. "This is why your son asked me to handle this gently." At that, Helen turned. Mark Mercer was walking up from the road, face pale with shame. He looked at the trucks, the phone, and the microphone. "Mom," he said quietly, "please don't do this out here." That hurt worse than the order. Helen could take strangers treating her like an old woman guarding junk. But Mark's embarrassment had blood in it. It came from love, worry, and months spent trying to pull her away. Dale nodded, almost pleased. "Family can help keep things calm." Helen looked at him. "Do not use my son like one of your orange cones." The hill went quiet. Mark stepped closer. "The county can fine you, They can put a lien on the house. Ridgeline won't wait because you're upset about Dad. Helen flinched, but only a little. Dad is gone, Mark said. The clinic is gone. Whatever happened here, it's over. Helen saw the boy who once slept across waiting room chairs during snow emergencies. Now he was a man trying to drag her towards safety before the world laughed harder. She loved him for that, but love did not make him right. It isn't over, she said. Then tell me what this is really about. Helen opened her mouth. For 1 second, she wanted to tell him everything. Paul's last whisper, the locked drawer, the number 43 scratched into a battery panel. But all she had was a promise. And promises sounded foolish when you could not explain them. So she said only, before they take it down, they have to hear the names. Dale exhaled. What names? Helen did not answer. Dale checked his watch. It is 7:40. I am giving you until noon. At noon, if this gate is still locked, my crew cuts the chain. Helen looked at the chain, the tower, and the dead microphone in her hand. Slowly, she set the microphone on a small wooden box beside the gate. The workers stared as if she had placed a weapon there. But Helen knew better. It was not a weapon. It was a witness, and before the day was over, she would have to decide whether she was guarding a memory or a truth that had waited 43 names too long to be heard. 27 years before the county called the tower obsolete, Pine Hollow Clinic had been the only light on the ridge that stayed on through bad weather. It sat 3 miles past the last gas station, where the paved road narrowed, and winter made every curve feel like a warning. In summer, dust settled over the waiting room chairs. In winter, ice glazed the steps so hard that Helen Mercer kept a coffee can of salt beside the door. Helen was 31 when she first put on the white nurse's coat. Back then, it fit her. She was strong from porch calls and mountain roads, from carrying a medical bag in one hand and a flashlight in the other. She could calm a fevered child, change a dressing by kerosene lamp, and drive through fog by remembering where the guardrails ended. Pine Hollow had no real hospital. The big one was 46 miles away in Larkspur, across 2 bridges and a road that washed out whenever rain came hard. For people with insurance and reliable cars, 46 miles was inconvenient. For Ridge families, it was another world. They came to the clinic with burns wrapped in dish towels, coughs that had lasted too long, broken fingers from sawmills, babies who would not wait for better weather, and quiet apologies about money. Dr. Elias Ward taught Helen never to ask about money first. He was already old then, tall and narrow, with silver hair and steady hands. He kept peppermints in his desk for children who needed stitches, and he spoke to poor patients like county officials. People tell you what they can afford before they tell you where it hurts, he once told Helen. Listen past the first answer. Helen admired him for that. To her, Dr. Ward was what medicine should have been: patient, stubborn, and decent when decency was inconvenient. Paul Mercer kept the clinic connected to the rest of the world. He was not a doctor. He was a radio man, a tower climber, a storm listener. He maintained the clinic tower like it had a heartbeat. Every Thursday, he checked the braces, cleaned the contacts, tested the backup batteries, and listened through static. A signal is only dead, he told Helen, when people stop listening. At first, Helen thought it was just one of his sayings. Then, the winter of 1988 came. The first storm arrived before Thanksgiving and left ice thick enough to bend trees. The second took down power lines. The third pushed snow sideways through cracks around the clinic door. For 11 days, the radio room barely slept. Helen remembered the green lamp over the console, the smell of warm wire and bitter coffee, Paul with one headphone pressed to his ear, and Dr. Ward standing behind him with a clipboard. Calls came in broken by static. A child with blue lips on Miller Road, an old man fallen near a wood stove, a woman in labor near Quarry Bend, a truck off the bridge road. Sometimes Paul reached the sheriff. Sometimes he reached a volunteer driver. Sometimes he only kept a frightened voice talking until help found a way through. Helen did not think of those calls as history. At the time, they were only work. You did the next thing, then the next, then the next. After the storms passed, Pine Hollow buried 2 people, celebrated 3 births, and patched roofs with blue tarps. The county praised Community resilience in the weekly paper. Families brought pies to the clinic. Dr. Ward looked older than Helen had ever seen him, but when someone called him a hero, he shook his head. "No heroes," he said. "Just people who answered." Helen believed him. That belief would hurt more than anger later. The first strange thing happened 2 months after the storm. Helen was filing patient cards when Paul came into the records room, holding a county incident summary. His face had changed. Not fear, not surprise. Something quieter. Disgust, maybe. "What is it?" she asked. Paul folded the paper once. "They left some out." "Who?" He looked toward Dr. Ward's office. The door was closed. The doctor's shadow moved behind the frosted glass. "People," Paul said. Helen waited. But Paul was careful when angry. He tucked the paper inside his jacket and told her not to worry until he understood it. She should have pushed him. She knew that now. But she was tired. The clinic was behind on bills. Mark was 7 and sleeping badly because every emergency call made him afraid his mother would not come home. Dr. Ward was fighting the county for funding again. So Helen let Paul carry the worry. It was the kind of mistake decent people make when they are exhausted. Small at the time, large later. Years passed. Pine Hollow changed the way forgotten places change. Slowly enough that people called it progress, then quickly enough that no one could stop it. Timber jobs thinned, families moved closer to Larkspur. The clinic lost funding, regained it, and lost it again. Dr. Ward retired first. He gave Helen his old stethoscope and said she had kept more people alive than she would ever know. She cried in the supply closet, where no one could see. The clinic closed 3 years later. Paul kept maintaining the tower anyway. At first, Helen teased him. "There's nobody calling anymore." Paul tightened a switch on the radio console and said, "That is not the same as nobody needing to." When his heart began failing, he could no longer climb the tower. Helen drove him to the clinic every Thursday, helped him into the radio room, and watched him test wires with trembling hands. He never opened the narrow drawer beneath the console in front of her. She noticed that too late. The drawer was built into the old wooden desk under the radio. Paul had installed it himself. Helen assumed it held wiring diagrams, spare fuses, or one of his notebooks. It had a brass lock and no label. Once, near the end, she asked him where the key was. Paul looked at the drawer for a long time. "Not yet," he said. That frightened her more than if he had said never. In his final week, Paul lay in a hospital bed in Larkspur, angry at the machines beside him. Helen held his hands because she could not fix anything else. His voice had become paper-thin. "If they ever come for it," he whispered, "make them hear the names first." "What names?" Helen asked, but Paul's eyes had already moved past her. 9 years passed after that. Helen kept the clinic gate key. She kept the tower log updated. She kept Paul's Thursday habit, like a widow keeps a chair at the table. She told herself she was honoring him. She told herself the names were the people they had saved. She told herself Dr. Ward would have understood. And because those thoughts were easier than doubt, she did not ask the harder question. Why would Paul ask her to make people hear names that everyone already remembered? By the time Ridgeline Communications sent its engineer to inspect the tower, most people in Pine Hollow had already decided what it was. Scrap, a rusted hazard, an old woman's attachment to a place that should have been cleared years ago. The tower stood behind the clinic in a square of waist-high grass, its lower braces stained brown, its bolts furred with age. A faded warning sign hung from the fence, the red letters bleached almost pink. One guy wire sagged slightly where ice had pulled at it winter after winter. To Dale Brackett, it was a liability. To Ridgeline, it was an obstacle. To Mark, it was one more reason his mother would not let the past rest. But to Helen, every part of it had a memory. The lowest rung still had a dent where Paul had dropped a wrench in 1994 and cursed loud enough for Mrs. Pike to hear from the waiting room. The junction box had a strip of black tape wrapped twice around the left side because Paul said the latch never trusted itself. The feed line entered the clinic wall through a patched metal sleeve he had cut and fitted by hand. Even the rust had geography. Helen knew which marks came from rain, which came from ice, and which came from the years after Paul could no longer climb. The Ridgeline engineer did not see any of that. His name was Trevor Vance, and he arrived wearing a clean, hard hat, a bright safety vest, and boots that had never learned mud. He carried a tablet instead of a clipboard and spoke in short professional sentences, the kind that sounded polite because they had been practiced. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, looking up at the tower, "this structure is past service life." Helen stood beside the gate with her arms folded. "So am I, according to half the people here." Trevor smiled, unsure whether to laugh. Dale did not. "We're not here to insult you," Dale said. "We're here to document what everyone already knows." Trevor tapped the tablet. "Corrosion at the base. Unknown grounding integrity. No recent certification. No active license tied to this site. And based on visible angle, possible stress deformation." Helen looked at the tower. "It leaned that way before your mother finished high school. That doesn't make it safe." "No," Helen said. "But age isn't the same as useless." Trevor glanced toward the clinic. "The new relay network has triple path redundancy. Cellular, GPS dispatch support, and satellite synchronization through the Larkspur hub. Even if one tower drops, the system reroutes." Helen had heard promises like that before. Clean words. Straight lines. Systems that looked perfect on maps made by people who had never taken the North Road after sleet. "Have you tested it with ice on the ridge?" she asked. Trevor paused. "The system is rated for this climate." "That is not what I asked." One of the county workers smirked. Dale stepped in. "Mrs. Mercer, Ridgeline services 5 counties, and Pine Hollow loses power before the rest of them finish dinner." Trevor's polite smile thinned. "With respect, analog radio is not a reliable emergency standard anymore." "With respect," Helen said. "Neither is a standard that has never been scared in the dark." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Dale sighed and motioned toward the clinic. "Can we at least inspect the radio room?" Helen did not want to let them inside. Not because of the dust. Not because of the boarded windows. Or the old exam table still standing in room 2. She did not want their clean hands on Paul's switches, their cameras pointed at the console, their certainty pressing against the locked drawer. But refusing would only make Dale cut the chain sooner. So she opened the gate. The clinic smelled of old wood, dry plaster, and the faint medicinal sharpness that never fully left. Trevor wrinkled his nose as they passed the front desk. Dale looked around, as if already imagining the space empty. Mark followed behind them, quiet. The radio room was at the back. Helen had kept it cleaner than the rest of the building. A green shaded lamp sat on the console. The old receiver rested beneath it, black and heavy, its knobs worn silver at the edges. Call sign labels lined the wall in Paul's handwriting. A coil of cable hung from a hook. The microphone from the gate lay on the desk now, looking smaller inside than it had outside. Trevor stopped in the doorway. "I didn't realize any of this was still here." "That is because nobody asked," Helen said. He moved closer to the console, careful not to touch it first. Then the engineer in him took over. He leaned down, studied the wiring, the grounding strap, the manual switchboard. "This is improvised. It is maintained. It's not code. It saved lives before code knew this road existed." Dale rubbed his forehead. "Helen, no," she said. "You wanted to inspect it." "Inspect it." Trevor crouched near the lower panel. "Battery backup?" Helen hesitated. Paul had built the battery bank himself after the 1988 storms, using marine batteries, hand-labeled disconnects, and a charging system tied to a small solar panel no one noticed from the road. Helen checked the voltmeter every Thursday, the way Paul had shown her. She opened the cabinet. Trevor's eyebrows lifted despite himself. The batteries were old, but not abandoned. The terminals were clean. The cables were labeled. A laminated card hung inside the door with Paul's block lettering. "Sequence before transmit." Trevor read it once, then again. Mark stepped closer. "Mom, you've been maintaining this?" "Paul taught me." "For 9 years?" "For longer than that, if you count watching." Dale looked uncomfortable now. Not convinced. Just less certain. Trevor pointed at a small metal tag screwed above one switch. "What's channel 43? Helen looked at the tag. She had noticed it before, but never studied it. Paul had marked many things in the radio room. Frequencies, call signs, relay notes, storm routes. Channel 43 seemed like one more piece of his private order. Backup channel, maybe, she said. Trevor checked the receiver. This unit doesn't have 43 channels. Helen felt something small shift inside her. Dale looked from her to the tag. Then what is it? I don't know. It cost her something to say that. Mark heard it too. His face softened, just a little, because for the first time that morning his mother had not sounded stubborn. She had sounded uncertain. Trevor took a photo of the tag. This is exactly my concern. Unknown modifications, undocumented wiring, unlicensed equipment. It may have personal meaning, but technically this system is not defensible. Helen kept staring at the number. Not a channel, not a frequency. Then what had Paul meant? Trevor stood and reached for the main power switch. Helen caught his wrist before he touched it. The room went still. Do not turn on something you do not know how to turn off, she said. Trevor pulled his hand back slowly. Dale's patience returned in a harder shape. That is enough. We've documented the room. This does not change the order. Helen closed the battery cabinet. As they left, Mark stayed behind for half a breath. Mom, he said quietly, if you don't know what that number means, maybe this isn't worth losing the house over. Helen looked at the console, the microphone, the locked drawer beneath the desk. For the first time, doubt moved through her, not like weakness, but like a door opening somewhere she had been afraid to go. Then the receiver gave a faint crackle. Not loud, not clear, just a thin burst of static that rose and disappeared before anyone outside the room could hear it. Mark turned back. What was that? Helen did not answer. She was looking at the old radio. For years, everyone had called the tower dead, but dead things did not answer when no one had called. By noon, half of Pine Hollow knew Helen Mercer had grabbed a county engineer by the wrist. By 1 o'clock, the story had grown larger. On Facebook, she had attacked him. At the diner, she had lost her mind. At the hardware store, someone said she was talking to a dead radio like it could answer her back. Helen heard none of it at first. She was still inside the clinic, standing in the radio room with the door closed, staring at the tag above the switch. Channel Treofua, Trevor Vance, had been right. The receiver did not have 43 channels. Paul had known that better than anyone. He would never have mislabeled a switch by accident. Helen pulled open the battery cabinet again and read the laminated card. Sequence before transmit. Main disconnect. Auxiliary charge. Ground check. Console warm-up. Manual relay. She had watched Paul do it hundreds of times. She had done it herself every Thursday after his hands began to shake, but always for maintenance. Never in front of people who wanted it to fail. Outside, the county crew waited near the gate. Dale had not cut the chain yet, but the yellow lift had been moved closer to the fence. Mark stood beside Dale, speaking in a low voice Helen could not hear. That hurt more than she wanted to admit. Her son was not cruel. He was afraid. She knew the difference. But fear could still stand on the wrong side of a gate. Helen touched the microphone. All right, Paul, she whispered. If there's anything left, now would be a kind time. She turned the main switch. The console gave a soft hum, then a click. For one hopeful second, the green lamp flickered. Then, everything went dark. Helen stood very still. She checked the battery meter. Nothing. She opened the lower panel and followed the cable with her finger. The main fuse slot was empty. Not blown. Empty. For a moment, she could not breathe properly. Paul kept spare fuses in a tin above the desk. She reached for it, but the tin was gone. Helen searched the shelf, the drawer beside the console, the cabinet under the lamp. Nothing. Her movements became sharper, less careful. Someone had removed it. Or Paul had. That second thought was worse. If Paul had removed the fuse himself, then maybe the tower had not been meant to transmit. Maybe the drawer, the number, the promise, all of it belonged to a part of his life he had chosen not to put fully in her hands. The door opened. Mark stood there, with Dale behind him. Mom, Mark said. Dale says if you can show them it still works, he'll delay until tomorrow. Dale's mouth tightened. I said I would consider recommending a temporary delay. Helen closed the panel. The fuse is missing. Trevor stepped around Dale and entered the room. That is another reason this system cannot be considered operational. It was there, Helen said. When? Helen looked at the empty slot. She wanted to say Thursday. She wanted to say last week. But she realized she had checked the meter, wiped the console, logged the date, cleaned the microphone, and listened for static. She had not opened that panel in months. I don't know, she said. Mark's face fell. Dale exhaled through his nose. Helen, don't say my name like a diagnosis. I am trying to help you avoid making this worse. Trevor pointed at the panel. Even if we found a fuse, there is no guarantee the transmitter would function. The antenna alignment alone, do you have a spare? Helen asked. Trevor blinked. For this? No. Then your certainty isn't much use either. The words came out harder than she meant them to. A few minutes later, Helen found an old fuse in the bottom of a metal box marked Relay Parts. It was wrapped in yellowing paper, Paul's handwriting across the side. Last clean one. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it. Dale, Trevor, Mark, 2 county workers, and 3 townspeople crowded near the doorway as if watching a woman perform a trick they expected to fail. One of the workers had his phone up. Helen saw the red recording light. She fit the fuse into place. Main disconnect. Auxiliary charge. Ground check. Console warm-up. Manual relay. The green lamp flickered again. This time, it held. A thin line of sound rose from the speaker. Static. Helen lifted the microphone. This is Mercer Clinic Radio, Pine Hollow Ridge. Testing emergency relay. Only static answered. She waited. Mercer Clinic Radio. Testing emergency relay. Does anyone copy? More static. Trevor looked at Dale. Dale looked at the floor. Mark closed his eyes. Helen pressed the transmit button again. This is Mercer Clinic Radio. If anyone copies, respond. A pop came through the speaker. Then a long, empty hiss. Behind her, one of the workers laughed under his breath. Not loudly. Not enough for Dale to correct him. But enough. The sound moved through Helen like cold water. She set the microphone down carefully. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her slam it. Trevor spoke in a softened voice now, which made it worse. Mrs. Mercer, static doesn't prove transmission. Old equipment can generate noise without reaching anything. I know what static is, Helen said. Mark stepped toward her. Mom, you tried. No, she said. I turned it on. That is not the same thing. But the people at the doorway had already decided. The video went up before Helen even left the room. By late afternoon, it had a caption. Old nurse calls ghosts on dead radio. Someone added laughing emojis. Someone else wrote, let the county do its job. At 5 o'clock, Ridgeline held a community information session in the town hall basement. Dale asked Helen not to come. Mark asked her twice. She went anyway. Trevor stood before a folding table with printed maps, coverage charts, and a bright blue diagram of the new relay network. He explained redundancy, emergency routing, digital stability, and how Pine Hollow would no longer depend on outdated single-point systems. People nodded. They liked the clean lines. They liked the promise of not being forgotten. Helen sat in the back row with her hands folded over her purse. When Trevor finished, Dale asked for questions. Helen stood. The room changed before she spoke. People shifted. Someone whispered, here we go. Helen looked at the coverage map. Does your model include ice loading on the North Ridge? Trevor kept his professional smile. Weather stress is factored into the network design. That is not what I asked. A few people groaned. Dale said, Mrs. Mercer, this meeting is not about relitigating the tower. It will be, Helen said, if that tower is the only thing left standing when your map goes dark. A man near the front laughed. You mean your ghost radio? More laughter. Mark rose halfway from his chair. Mom, sit down. Helen looked at him, and the room became harder to stand in than any storm she remembered. She sat, not because they were right, because she was suddenly afraid she might not be able to prove they were wrong. After the meeting, people filed past her without meeting her eyes. Dale stayed near the folding table. Trevor packed his maps. Mark waited by the door, ashamed and worried and tired. Helen was reaching for her coat when an old woman touched her sleeve. Nora Pike was smaller than Helen remembered, with a cane in one hand and a photograph in the other. Her face had the sharp, weathered look of ridge people who had spent their lives being told to wait. "My brother's name," Nora said quietly. "Better still be in that room." Helen stared at her. "What?" Nora pressed the photograph into Helen's hand. It showed a young man standing outside Pine Hollow Clinic in a denim jacket, one arm raised toward the radio tower as if he were joking with whoever held the camera. On the back, written in faded ink, were 6 words. "Call came in." County said no record. Helen looked up, but Nora had already turned away. For the first time that day, the laughter around Helen did not matter. Something else had started, and it had a name. Helen did not sleep that night. The photograph Nora Pike had given her lay on the kitchen table beneath the yellow light, beside Paul's old pocketknife and a cup of tea gone cold. The young man in the picture could not have been more than 25. He had dark hair, a crooked smile, and one hand lifted toward the tower like he was greeting a friend. On the back, the words seemed to grow heavier every time Helen read them. Call came in. County said no record. She turned the photograph over again. The clinic behind him looked alive. Curtains in the windows. Porch swept clean. The radio tower straight and bright against the sky. Helen tried to remember him. Pike, Nora's brother. There had been so many faces over the years. Men from logging crews. Boys who grew into fathers. Mothers who came in with 1 child. Then 3. Then grandchildren. Some people had stayed in Helen's memory because of a scar, a birth, a death, a voice on the radio. But this young man would not come clear. That frightened her. Not because she had forgotten one person, because she was beginning to understand how easy it was for a whole town to do the same. Near midnight, Helen took Paul's old keyring from the kitchen drawer and drove back to the clinic. The road was empty. Pine Hollow had gone quiet in the way small towns do after they finish laughing. The moon sat behind thin clouds. The tower rose over the clinic like a black seam stitched into the sky. Inside, the air was cold enough to make her breath show. Helen did not go straight to the radio room. She went to the medicine cabinet. For years, she had avoided it, not because there was anything useful left inside. The medicines had been cleared out long ago. The glass shelves were empty, except for a roll of gauze hardened by age, a brown bottle with no label, and the small brass key that opened the bottom drawer, where Dr. Ward used to keep controlled forms. Helen had never touched that drawer after the clinic closed. It felt like opening someone else's conscience. But Paul had once said something near the end, when morphine had made his words drift in and out. "Not in the desk," he had whispered. He'd looked there first. At the time, Helen thought he was dreaming. Now she unlocked the bottom drawer of the medicine cabinet. It stuck at first. Then it opened with a dry scrape. Inside was an envelope taped to the underside of the drawer. Helen pulled it free. Her name was not on it. Only one sentence, written in Paul's careful block letters. Not the channel. The Count. Helen sat down on the old stool beside the cabinet. For a moment, the clinic seemed to tilt around her. Channel Théophile. Not the channel. The Count. 43 what? Calls? People? Families? Deaths? She folded the paper once, then again, as if making it smaller could make the truth easier to hold. In the radio room, the console waited under the green lamp. Helen opened Paul's old maintenance notebook and searched page by page. Most entries were ordinary. Battery readings, weather notes, relay tests, grounding checks. Then she noticed something. Every few months, Paul had written a small mark beside certain dates. Not a word, not a code she recognized, just a tiny cross drawn in the margin. She counted them. 43. Her hands went cold. Some pages had been cut out with a blade. Not torn, cut clean. Helen touched the missing edges. She could almost see Paul sitting there, deciding what to leave and what to hide. Anger rose in her, sudden and sharp. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. The room gave no answer. Outside, wind moved through the weeds against the clinic wall. Helen replaced the notebook and looked at the radio. Yesterday, it had humiliated her. Static in front of Dale, static in front of Mark. Static for a town that wanted proof and got a joke instead. But static was not nothing. Static meant power. It meant the receiver still had breath in it. She checked the fuse again. The last clean one remained in place. She followed Paul's sequence slowly, refusing to hurry. Main disconnect. Auxiliary charge. Ground check. Console warm-up. Manual relay. The green lamp came on. Helen adjusted the dial, turning past dead air and thin bursts of noise. She remembered Paul's hands over hers years ago, teaching her not to chase sound too fast. Static has edges, he had said. Listen for the edge. She turned slower. A crackle rose. Then a voice, faint and broken. Copy. Say again. North repeater. Helen froze. She leaned toward the speaker. This is Mercer Clinic Radio, Pine Hollow Ridge. Does anyone copy? Static swallowed the room. Then the voice returned, weak but real. Mercer Clinic. This is W4KLD. Over near Mason County line. Didn't know that call sign still existed. Helen closed her eyes. For 1 second, she was 31 again, standing beside Paul while a voice came through a storm. This is Helen Mercer, she said, and her own name nearly broke in her throat. I'm testing emergency relay capability. Well, Mrs. Mercer, the old voice answered, fading in and out. You're weak as a candle in rain, but you're reaching. Weak as a candle in rain, but reaching. Helen wrote the call sign down with a shaking hand. W4KD. Mason County line. Time. 1:17 a.m. For the first time since Dale arrived, she had proof that the tower was not dead. Not enough to stop the county, but enough to stop herself from doubting what she had heard. In the morning, she drove to Dale Brackett's office with the note, the call sign, and Paul's envelope in her purse. Dale listened with the expression of a man trying to remain patient in front of a problem he wanted to outlast. A ham operator heard you, he said. Yes. From another county. Yes. And that proves the tower can function under emergency conditions? It proves it can reach beyond the ridge. It proves a hobbyist heard a weak signal at 1 in the morning. Helen's fingers tightened around her purse strap. You were ready to tear it down when you believed it reached no one. Dale looked away. For half a second, shame crossed his face. Then the official returned. I can delay removal until tomorrow morning, he said. No longer. Ridgeline has equipment staging scheduled. If you have something legal, bring it. If you have a memory, Helen, let it rest. Helen stood. A memory did not answer me from Mason County. Outside the office, Mark was waiting by her car. Dale had called him. Of course he had. Mom, Mark said, if they find you again, it may not just be the clinic property. They can come after the house. Helen looked at him, tired enough to tell the truth, and afraid enough to keep part of it back. Paul left me something. Mark's face changed. What kind of something? I don't know yet. That's what scares me. Before Helen could answer, a familiar voice came from behind them. Nora Pike stood near the curb, leaning on her cane. In her other hand was a folder held together with a rubber band. My brother's name was Samuel, Nora said. Samuel Pike. Helen turned slowly. Nora held out the folder. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping about the 1988 storm. It listed official rescues, road closures, births, injuries, and 2 confirmed deaths. Samuel Pike was not mentioned. Behind the clipping was a handwritten note from Nora's mother. Called clinic 2:13 a.m. Paul answered. Ward sent truck. County later said no call came. Helen read it twice. Then she looked at Nora. What happened to him? Nora's mouth tightened. He lived, she said. That's the part they erased. For the first time, Helen understood that the missing names were not only names of the dead. Some were names of people who had survived, because the tower answered. And for reasons she still did not understand, someone had decided those lives did not count. The storm reached Pine Hollow before sunset. It came over the ridge in a wall of black cloud, dragging cold rain behind it like chains. By 4:30, the wind had turned the clinic grass flat. By 5, tree limbs were snapping along North Spur Road. By 5:15, the power flickered twice across town and then gave up in whole neighborhoods at once. Helen was already at the clinic. She had not told Mark. She had not told Dale. She had driven there with Paul's envelope in her coat pocket. Nora Pike's folder on the passenger seat. and the call sign from Mason County written on the back of an old prescription pad. W4KLD, weak as a candle in rain. But reaching, inside the radio room, the green lamp glowed from battery power. Helen checked the sequence again. Slower this time, because fear made people skip steps. Main disconnect, auxiliary charge, ground check, console warm-up, manual relay. The wind pressed against the back wall so hard, the window frame clicked. Helen looked at the locked drawer beneath the console. Not yet, Paul had said once. For years, she had obeyed those words without knowing whether they were instruction or warning. But the storm outside made old patience feel like cowardice. She took out the small brass key from the medicine cabinet drawer. It did not fit. Helen stared at it. For a moment, anger nearly broke through her ribs. Paul had left her a clue, a number, a promise, and still not the key. Then, headlights swept across the boarded front windows. Someone pounded on the clinic door. Helen. It was Sheriff Tom Alvarez. His hat was soaked. His jacket shone with rain. Behind him, Dale Brackett stepped into the hall with water dripping from his county jacket, and behind Dale came Trevor Vance, carrying a tablet that was no longer glowing. Helen looked past them. If you're here about the demolition order, your timing is poor. Tom ignored that. Cell towers are down from Pine Hollow Ridge to Quarry Bend. The new relay station is offline. Dispatch can't route ambulance units north. Trevor's jaw tightened. It's a temporary cascade failure. Ice loading hit the relay array faster than projected. Helen looked at him. So it has been scared in the dark. He did not answer. Dale stepped forward. His face had lost all its official polish. Helen, we have a call from the Harper place past Miller Road. Young woman, 32 weeks pregnant, heavy bleeding. Her husband reached 911 once before the signal dropped. Ambulance left Larkspur, but GPS is useless past the washout. Helen felt the old room settle around her. The fear was familiar. Not easier, just familiar. What road are they on now? Tom shook his head. That's the problem. Last ping put them near County 12, but the bridge may be blocked. We need a way to reach Mason County Volunteer Relay, or anyone on the far side who can guide them through Old Quarry Cut. Dale swallowed. Can you do it? Helen looked at the radio. That morning, they had called it dead. Yesterday, they had laughed when it answered only with static. Now 3 men stood in the room waiting for an old woman to make the dead speak. I can try, she said. But none of you touches anything unless I tell you. No one argued. That was the first silence. Helen sat at the console and put on Paul's old headset. The cushion cracked softly against her ear. She adjusted the dial, searching for the edge of static the way Paul had taught her. The speaker hissed. Rain struck the roof. Somewhere outside, a branch scraped the clinic wall like fingernails. This is Mercer Clinic Radio, Pine Hollow Ridge Emergency Relay Test, Helen said into the microphone. Mason County line, W4KLD. Do you copy? Static. Trevor shifted behind her. Helen raised one hand without looking back. He stopped moving. She tried again. W4KLD. This is Mercer Clinic Radio. Emergency traffic. Do you copy? A pump. A long hiss. Then a voice, faint and ragged. Mercer Clinic? You're buried in weather. Say traffic. Helen closed her eyes for half a second. Need relay for ambulance route to Harper Place past Miller Road. Local cell network down. Can you reach Mason Volunteer Channel? Stand by. The room held its breath. Tom gripped the door frame. Dale stared at the microphone as if it had become something holy and terrible at once. Trevor looked at his dead tablet. Helen kept one hand on the dial. The signal faded, returned, faded again. She could almost feel Paul beside her. Not as a ghost, but as muscle memory. Not too fast. Listen for the edge. W4KLD came back. Mason Volunteer copies. Old Quarry Cut passable. Bridge Road blocked by Pine Fall. Ambulance must turn at Harlan Mailbox. Take Gravel Spur. Follow Creek Fence south. Tom repeated the directions into his handheld for the ambulance crew, then cursed when his own radio broke apart. Helen pressed transmit. Repeat directions slowly. The old man repeated them. Helen wrote every word down. Dale tore a page from his clipboard and handed it to Tom. Trevor, pale now, moved toward the window to find any signal at all, and found none. For 23 minutes, the radio room became the center of Pine Hollow again. Helen relayed road conditions from Mason County. W4KLD relayed ambulance position when the signal reached him. Tom sent a deputy toward the gravel spur. Dale stood useless for the first time all day, and the uselessness humbled him more than any speech could have. Then, through the static, came a new voice. Mercer Clinic. This is Larkspur Unit 3. We have visual on the Harper residence. Helen's hand tightened around the microphone. Copy, Unit 3. A minute later, another burst. Patient loaded. En route by Old Quarry Cut. Baby has heartbeat. Tom looked down. Dale turned away. Even Trevor shut his eyes. Helen did not cry. Not yet. She had learned long ago that in emergencies, relief had to wait its turn. When the ambulance cleared the ridge, W4KLD came back one last time. Mercer Clinic. Tell whoever kept that old tower breathing they did good. Helen looked at the locked drawer. I will, she said. After that, the room changed. No one laughed. No one mentioned ghosts. No one called the tower scrap, but victory did not feel clean. It felt like a door opening onto another darker room. Dale cleared his throat. Helen, about the drawer. She looked at him sharply. He pointed to the old wooden desk. If there are records related to emergency operations, the county may need to secure them. Nora Pike's sentence came back to Helen. My brother's name better still be in that room. Helen stood and pulled at the locked drawer. It held firm. Trevor crouched near the desk. The lock is old. We can remove the faceplate without damaging the contents. Helen almost refused. Then, she remembered Paul's key not fitting. Maybe he had not meant for her to open it alone. Maybe the names had to be heard with witnesses in the room. Do it carefully, she said. Trevor worked with a small screwdriver from his tool pouch. The screws resisted, then turned. The brass plate came loose. The drawer slid out with a dry wooden groan. Inside was a stack of black radio logbooks tied with cotton tape. On top lay a folded sheet in Paul's handwriting. Unreported assists 43. No one spoke. Helen untied the tape. The first page listed a date from the winter of 1988. A call time, a road name, a patient condition, and a family name. Pike, Samuel. Beside it was a note in another hand. County summary. No call received. Helen's stomach turned. She flipped to the next marked page. Then the next. Names. Times. Call signs. Families. 43 entries. 43 people or households whose emergencies had passed through this room and then vanished from the official record. Dale leaned closer, and his face went bloodless. Helen saw what he saw. Bracket. Irene. Respiratory distress. North Spur Road. Relay completed. County summary. Self-evacuated. Dale stepped back as if the page had accused him aloud. My grandmother, he whispered. The storm kept beating against the clinic walls. The tower hummed softly above them, and Helen understood, with a grief so deep it felt almost calm, that Paul had not guarded the radio because it could still save lives. He had guarded it because it had already saved lives someone decided did not count. By morning, Pine Hollow had two stories moving through town. The first was the one everyone wanted to tell. An old radio tower had saved a mother and her unborn child after the new relay system failed. That story was clean. It had a storm, a rescue, and an old nurse who had been right when everyone else laughed. People could understand that kind of story. They could share it over coffee. They could apologize without changing too much. The second story was harder. 43 emergency assists had been written down in Paul Mercer's logbooks and left out of county records. That story had names, and names demanded answers. Dale Brackett arrived at the clinic just after 8, with 2 deputies, a sealed evidence box, and the expression of a man who had slept badly. Helen was already in the radio room. The logbook sat on the console, tied again with cotton tape. Nora Pike stood near the window with both hands on her cane. Mark leaned against the wall, watching his mother, as if she might disappear into the past if he looked away. Dale cleared his throat. Helen, the county attorney wants these records secured. Nora laughed once, dry and sharp. That was fast. Dale looked at her. Mrs. Pike, this is now potentially part of an official review. Official review is how my brother disappeared the first time. One deputy shifted his weight. Helen did not touch the books. What does secured mean? She asked. Dale chose his words carefully. It means the logs should be transferred to county custody until we determine chain of evidence, privacy concerns, and whether any reporting laws were violated. Helen looked at the evidence box. A neat white box. A county seal. A place where paper could go quiet again. No, she said. Dale's face tightened. You cannot simply keep records that may belong to the county. They were kept here because the county did not keep them. Mark pushed away from the wall. Mom, we need a lawyer before this gets worse. It is already worse, Nora said. That's why people like you always ask for quiet. Mark turned on her. I'm trying to keep my mother from losing everything. Nora's eyes softened, but her voice did not. And I am trying to keep my brother from being lost twice. The words landed hard. Helen saw Mark absorb them and look away. Outside, a Ridgeline truck pulled into the gravel lot. Trevor Vance stepped out with a woman in a dark raincoat and expensive boots. She introduced herself as Claire Dunham, Regional Operations Counsel for Ridgeline, not a technician, a lawyer. She looked at the tower, then at the clinic, then at Helen, assessing value and danger in the same glance. Mrs. Mercer, Claire said. First, Ridgeline is grateful for your assistance during last night's emergency. Helen waited. Claire continued. However, there are liability issues now. The public is already drawing conclusions about our network based on a rare weather cascade. We would like to help stabilize this situation. Stabilize, Nora muttered. That means bury. Claire's smile did not move. It means funding a professional assessment. Ridgeline is prepared to pay for structural reinforcement of the clinic building, temporary preservation of the tower, and independent digitization of any relevant records, provided distribution is handled through proper legal channels. Mark looked at Helen before he could stop himself. Helen saw the calculation in his eyes. The roof at her house leaked above the back bedroom. Her furnace had failed twice last winter. The county fines, if they came, would not be symbolic. Ridgeline's money could make problems disappear, or make the names disappear politely. Dale saw it too. Helen, this could protect you. From what? From exposure, from lawsuits, from people saying you operated unauthorized emergency equipment. I did operate it, to save a life. Then say that. Dale had no answer. Claire stepped closer. No one is asking you to destroy anything. We are only asking for patience. Nora tapped her cane against the floor. My mother was patient until the day she died. Helen looked down at the logbooks. For 9 years, she had thought the cost of keeping Paul's promise was loneliness. A locked gate. A few jokes. Her son's worry. Now the price had a shape. If she held the logs, the county could accuse her of withholding records. If she released them too quickly, families might learn painful truths from rumors. If she accepted Ridgeline's help, the story might be softened until it no longer cut anyone who deserved to bleed. Then, Dale said the name Helen had been avoiding. Dr. Ward may be involved. The room went still. Mark looked at his mother. Nora looked at the books. Helen's hand moved to the edge of the console. Dale opened a folder. Some log pages have summary notes attached. Several appear to carry Ward's initials. If these documents are authentic, he may have signed corrected reports that never went forward. Helen heard Paul's voice in memory. They left some out. Then she saw Paul looking toward Dr. Ward's closed office door. No, she said, but quietly. Not because she knew it was false, because she was afraid it was true. Nora's face hardened. He saved some. Then he signed away the rest. You don't know that. I know my mother begged for a copy of Samuel's call record and was told no call came. I know Dr. Ward would not look at her after that. Helen stood too quickly. Dr. Ward kept this clinic alive. Nora did not flinch. Maybe that was the bargain. The sentence struck Helen harder than any insult from the crowd. Claire used the silence. This is exactly why public release would be irresponsible. Memories are emotional. Records need review. Helen almost believed her. That was the frightening part. Because Helen wanted time. She wanted Dr. Ward to remain the man with peppermints in his drawer. She wanted Paul's promise to be simple. She wanted the tower to be only a thing that had saved a mother in a storm. But Nora was still standing by the window. Dale was still pale from seeing his grandmother's name. Mark was still staring at the evidence box like it might swallow their house with the papers. And the logbooks were still there. 43 entries heavy enough to change the air. Helen untied the cotton tape. Dale stepped forward. Helen, don't. She opened the first book to Samuel Pike's page. I am not releasing them to the newspaper, she said. I am not handing them to Ridgeline. And I am not putting them in a county box where they can sleep another 38 years. What are you doing? Mark asked. Helen looked at Nora. Making copies, she said. For every family named. Then we find a lawyer who does not owe Pine Hollow County anything. Dale lowered his eyes. Claire's smile finally vanished. Outside, the tower stood against the gray morning, still wet from the storm, no longer looking dead, only dangerous. Not because it might fall, because it had started holding people up to the truth. The lawyer, who came to the clinic, did not wear a suit. Her name was Marion Bell, and she arrived in a mud-splashed station wagon with a scanner, 2 storage drives, 3 legal pads, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She was not from Pine Hollow County. That was the first thing Nora Pike liked about her. The second was that Marion did not begin by asking who owned the records. She began by asking who had been harmed. Helen watched her set up at the old reception desk while Mark ran an extension cord from the battery system Paul had built. Sheriff Alvarez stood near the front door, not guarding anyone, exactly, but making sure no one walked in and carried the past away. Dale Brackett had come back too. He stood apart from the others, holding a copy of the page with his grandmother's name, as if the paper had weight beyond paper. Marion opened the first logbook. We scan everything before anyone argues over custody, she said. Original order stays documented. No pages leave the room alone. Every copy gets a witness note. Claire Dunham from Ridgeline had objected by phone. The county attorney had objected louder. Marion had listened, said, file something, and hung up. For the first hour, nobody spoke much. The scanner made its thin moving sound. Pages turned. Rainwater dripped from the eaves outside. The tower, still wet from the storm, stood beyond the back window like an old witness waiting to be sworn in. The first entries were ordinary emergency logs. Time received. Caller location. Condition. Relay contact. Response sent. Outcome. Then, Marion reached the pages marked with Paul's small crosses. The handwriting changed there. Paul's writing was blocky and mechanical. Dr. Ward's was narrow, slanted, elegant. Helen knew it instantly. She had seen it on prescriptions, discharge notes, birthday cards, and the small note he had left her when the clinic closed. Thank you for staying when others left. Now that same handwriting sat beside the missing calls. County summary inconsistent. No transport recorded. Patient advised self-care per official note. Corrected report requested. Correction denied. Helen felt each line as if someone were removing one brick at a time from the house where she had kept her memories. Marion placed a finger beside one note. This one has initials. F. No one said his name. They did not need to. Nora stood behind Helen. Keep going. They kept going. By late afternoon, the 43 entries had become more than a number. Samuel Pike had not been a death. He had been a rescue. Paul received the call at 2:13 a.m. Dr. Ward sent a volunteer truck when the county dispatcher logged the road as impassable. Samuel survived exposure and a head injury, but the county later denied receiving the call because the official rescue route had failed. Nora read that page without crying. That was worse. Her hands stayed locked around the top of her cane. My mother wrote letters for 6 years, she said. They told her grief had confused her. No one answered. The next consequence belonged to Dale. His grandmother, Irene Brackett, had suffered respiratory distress during the same winter. The county record claimed her family had evacuated her before emergency services arrived. Paul's log showed something different. Helen had taken the radio call, Doctor. Ward had walked Tom Harlan through oxygen setup, and Paul had relayed road conditions until a volunteer driver reached the house. Dale read the entry twice. "My father said they got her out themselves," he whispered. "Maybe that's what he was told," Mark said. Dale looked at him, grateful and ashamed at once. The third consequence came from a group of entries Marion spread across the reception desk. Seasonal workers, families without permanent addresses, 2 elderly sisters on North Spur Road, a young mother who gave birth before the ambulance reached her, a coal widow whose call had been marked non-emergency in the county file, even though Paul's log said Dr. Ward requested immediate transport. Some of those people had lived. Some had died later. Some had moved away without ever knowing anyone had written down the truth. But all of them had one thing in common. In the official record, the county response looked cleaner without them. Helen stepped back from the desk. She could hear the old clinic in her memory now. Footsteps, ringing phones. Paul's voice through static. Dr. Ward saying, "No heroes, just people who answered." But he had answered. That was what made it unbearable. Dr. Elias Ward had answered many of those calls. He had sent help when the county would not. He had treated people who could not pay. He had kept the clinic open on promises, favors, and money no one ever saw twice. Then he had signed summaries that softened the truth. Not all of them. Enough. Enough to let the county praise itself. Enough to keep funding alive. Enough to keep Pine Hollow Clinic from being punished for going around official channels. Enough to erase the people whose lives proved the system had failed. Helen found the note that explained it near the back of the second logbook. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed to Paul. In Dr. Ward's handwriting, "Paul, if I file the full corrections, they will cut the clinic before spring. If I sign the county version, we stay open and keep answering. I know what that makes me. I am asking you to hate me later if it means we can save them now." Helen read it once. Then again, her anger had nowhere simple to go. Nora leaned over her shoulder. "He knew." Helen nodded. "He knew," she said. Mark touched the edge of the desk. "Mom." Helen looked at him and saw that he understood the worst part. Dr. Ward had not been a monster. A monster would have been easier. He had been a good man who made a bargain with a bad system. Then let the bargain write over people's names. That was the moral stain. Not that the clinic had failed, that it had saved people and still allowed them to be erased. Marion scanned the letter in silence. When it was done, she looked at Helen. "There is enough here to request an independent investigation. There may also be exposure for the county, possibly for the clinic estate, depending on how records were handled." Mark's face tightened. "Could they come after my mother?" "Maybe not successfully," Marion said, "but they can make her life hard." Dale folded his grandmother's page and unfolded it again. "The county will say these are unofficial logs. Then they can explain why their official files contradict 43 time-stamped entries," Marion said. Helen looked toward the radio room. The locked drawer was open now. For years, she had believed Paul left her a duty to protect the tower. But the tower had only been the box. The promise was inside it. Make them hear the names first. Not keep the tower. Not defend Dr. Ward. Not preserve the clinic's reputation. The names. Helen took the first logbook and opened it to Samuel Pike. Then she looked at Nora. "I thought Paul wanted me to keep this place standing," she said. Nora's voice was low. "Maybe he wanted you to make sure it stood for the right thing." That broke something in Helen. Not loudly. Not with tears. It broke the way ice breaks inside a river before anyone sees the water move. She thought of Dr. Ward's peppermints, his steady hands, the stethoscope he had given her, the way she had built a clean room in her heart for him and kept all doubt outside the door. Now the door was open, and she had to choose what came through it. Claire called again near dusk. This time, Helen answered on speaker. Ridgeline was still willing to fund repairs, Claire said. The county was still willing to arrange a controlled review. No one wanted misinformation. No one wanted families hurt by incomplete context. Helen listened until the polished words ran out. Then she said, "The families were hurt by silence. Context can come after their names." Claire warned her about liability. Dale warned her about procedure. Mark warned her about the house. Marion warned her that truth did not protect anyone from consequences. Helen heard all of them. Then she placed the logbooks back on the reception desk, one by one. "Make the copies," she said. "Every page, every name, every note." Mark closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked older. But he did not stop her. Outside, the last light caught on the wet tower. For the first time, Helen did not see Paul's hands on the metal. She did not see her own grief. She did not even see the clinic as it had been. She saw 43 voices moving through the dark, asking only one thing of the living: "Do not save us, and then pretend we were never there." Helen refused to hold the hearing at Town Hall. Dale offered it twice. The county attorney preferred it. Ridgeline preferred it. Even Mark said it would be warmer, easier, safer, and less likely to turn into a spectacle. Helen listened to all of them. Then she said, "The names were hidden in the clinic. They will be heard at the clinic." So on Saturday morning, folding chairs appeared in the gravel lot beneath the tower. No banner was hung. No stage was built. Helen would not allow a podium with the county seal. Marion Bell set a small table near the clinic steps with 3 copies of the scanned logs, each sealed in a clear folder. Sheriff Alvarez stood near the gate, not in a threatening way, but in the way a man stands when he wants people to understand that the day matters. Families came slowly at first. Nora Pike arrived with Samuel's photograph in a brown envelope. The Harlans came together, 3 generations in one truck. 2 women from North Spur Road brought a shoebox of their mother's papers. A man Helen did not recognize drove in from Larkspur and said his father had worked seasonal apple harvest in 1988. By 10 o'clock, the gravel lot was full. Some people had come because they were named in the logs. Some came because they were ashamed of laughing. Some came because small towns cannot resist a reckoning, especially when they are not yet sure who will be blamed. Mark stood beside Helen at the clinic steps. He had not said much that morning. He had carried chairs, checked the extension cord, brought his mother coffee, and fixed the loose button on her nurse's coat without mentioning it. That was his apology. Not in words. Not yet, but Helen felt it. Dale arrived last. He wore no county jacket, only a plain dark coat and a face that had lost sleep for more than one night. In his hand was a folded copy of Irene Brackett's radio log. People watched him walk to the front. For a moment, Helen thought he would make a speech. Instead, he turned to Nora Pike. "My office helped dismiss you," he said. "Not me personally. I know that sounds like an excuse. I don't mean it as one. I mean the office I stood behind did harm before I ever sat in it, and yesterday I nearly helped it do harm again." Nora studied him. "That is not an apology to my brother," she said. Dale lowered his eyes. "No, it isn't enough." Then he faced the crowd. "The tower will not be removed while these records are under independent review. The county will preserve the site, cooperate with outside counsel, and release all storm response archives from 1988 for comparison." Claire Dunham, standing near the back for Ridgeline, shifted but did not interrupt. Dale continued. "Ridgeline has agreed to fund emergency backup training for the Ridge as part of its revised safety plan. Not as a donation, as a requirement." Trevor Vance stood beside her, looking at the ground. Helen could tell he hated how much he had learned, but learning was better than certainty. Marion nodded to Helen. Helen opened the first logbook. She did not explain the whole story again. She did not accuse everyone at once. She did not turn the morning into a sermon. She read the names: Samuel Pike, Irene Brackett, Martha Harlan, June and Elsie Webb, Thomas Reed, Alicia Moreno, Earl Pritchard, Louise Bell. One by one, 43 names moved into the cold morning air. Some people cried when they recognized a parent, a brother, a grandmother, a neighbor. Some looked confused, as if their own family history had shifted under their feet. Some stared at the gravel because grief was easier when no one saw it. When Helen finished, she closed the book with both hands. "These records do not make Pine Hollow Clinic innocent," she said. "They do not make Dr. Ward a villain only. They do not make the county one person, or the storm one mistake. But they prove this. Help came to people who were later written out of the story, and no town has the right to be proud of a rescue while pretending the rescued never existed. No one clapped. Helen was grateful. Applause would have been too easy. Afterward, people came forward in small groups. Marion took names and contact information. Sheriff Alvarez arranged copies. Trevor asked Helen, quietly, if he could photograph Paul's battery sequence for the new backup training manual. Helen looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, only if Paul's name stays on it. Trevor nodded. It will. Near noon, Mark found Helen behind the clinic, standing where the tower's shadow crossed the wet grass. I thought I was protecting you, he said. I know. I thought Dad's promise was eating what was left of your life. Helen looked up at the tower. So did I, sometimes. Mark swallowed. I'm sorry I made you stand there alone. Helen took his hand. You came back, she said. That was enough for the moment. In the afternoon, Helen asked Sheriff Alvarez to drive her to the care home in Larkspur. Dr. Elias Ward was 91 now, thin as folded paper, sitting by a window with a blanket over his knees. For a few seconds, Helen saw the man he had been. Steady hands, silver hair, peppermints in the drawer. Then she saw the signature beside 43 missing truths. He recognized her slowly. Helen, he said. Did they come for the tower? Yes. His eyes closed. Paul kept them, didn't he? The logs. Dr. Ward nodded. Helen sat across from him. You signed the summaries. His mouth trembled once. If I filed the corrections, they would have closed us. They told me that. No clinic, no radio, no help for the next storm. So you let them erase the last one. A tear slipped down the old doctor's cheek. I told myself saved lives mattered more than recorded ones. Helen's voice was gentle, but it did not soften the truth. Recorded lives are how people stay saved after the emergency ends. Dr. Ward turned toward the window. I was a coward in a useful coat, he whispered. Helen did not forgive him. Not there, not fully, but she took from her purse a copy of the page with Samuel Pike's name and placed it on his blanket. Then be useful one more time, she said. Sign a statement while you still can. The old doctor looked at the page for a long time. Then he reached for a pen. By spring, the tower was still standing. Not because Pine Hollow suddenly became sentimental. Not because the county discovered respect overnight. It stood because the engineers who came after the storm wrote what Helen had known for years and language officials could not laugh away. The ridge needed a backup system that did not depend on cell service, satellite sync, or a locked relay station with a red failure light. The tower was not declared beautiful. It was not declared historic at first. It was declared useful. Helen liked that better. Useful was honest. The investigation into the 1,988 storm records moved slowly, as investigations often do when the truth has to pass through offices built to delay it. Marion Bell filed petitions. Dale Brackett released archives his predecessors had sealed under harmless-sounding labels. Ridgeline revised its emergency plan. The county attorney issued careful statements that admitted process failures without using the word guilt. Families did not wait for official language. They came to the clinic with folders, photographs, letters, and stories that had sat too long in kitchen drawers. Some wanted copies of the logs. Some wanted to know who had taken the original calls. Some only wanted to stand inside the radio room and see the place where a voice they loved had once reached help. Nora Pike came every Thursday for a while. She never stayed long. The first time, she placed Samuel's photograph on the radio console and touched the edge of the microphone with 2 fingers. He always liked being loud, she said. Helen smiled. Then, he chose the right room. Nora did not laugh, but her face loosened in a way that was close enough. Dr. Ward signed his statement 3 days before he died. It did not excuse him. Helen made sure of that. The statement said what he had done, why he had told himself it was necessary, and why that reason had not been enough. He named the county pressure. He named the corrections he had failed to file. He named Paul Mercer as the man who refused to let the missing calls disappear. At the funeral, some people spoke of Dr. Ward as a good doctor. Some spoke of him as a compromised man. Helen said nothing. Both were true, and neither was large enough. Mark came to her house the week after and fixed the roof over the back bedroom. He brought 2 friends, a borrowed ladder, and more shingles than the job required. Helen stood in the yard with coffee, pretending not to supervise. When Mark climbed down, his hands were black with tar and his face was streaked with sweat. "You know," he said, "Dad would have told me I was holding the hammer wrong." "He would have waited until you were almost finished," Helen said. Mark laughed. It was the first easy sound between them in a long time. The clinic changed slowly. No one reopened it as a medical office. That life was gone, and Helen had no interest in pretending otherwise. Room 2 became storage for emergency blankets, lanterns, water filters, and first aid kits. The old front desk became a sign-in table for training sessions. The waiting room chairs were cleaned, repaired, and lined along the wall. The radio room remained the heart. Trevor Vance returned in June with a crew, not to remove the tower, but to reinforce it. He worked quietly. He asked more questions than he answered. When he photographed Paul's battery sequence, he included Paul's name at the top of the new manual, just as he had promised. Mercer Backup Sequence. Helen read it once and had to turn away. By late summer, the first emergency radio class met on a hot Saturday morning. There were 12 students. 3 were volunteer firefighters. 2 were high school seniors. 1 was a young mother named Claire Harper, who brought her baby in a carrier and sat near the door in case he woke. Dale Brackett came too, not as commissioner that day, but as a man whose grandmother's name had been found in a book he had almost locked away. Helen stood at the front with the old microphone in her hand. She did not begin with theory. She began with silence. "Before you transmit," she said, "you listen." Most people skip that part. They think communication starts when they speak. It doesn't. It starts when they decide somebody out there is worth hearing. No one moved. Outside, the tower rose against a bright sky. It still showed rust in places. It still leaned a little if you looked at it from the road, but the braces had been secured, the grounding repaired, and the feed line replaced without disturbing Paul's old labels inside the wall. Helen passed the microphone to the youngest student, a 17-year-old girl named Lacey Harlan. Lacey held it like it might break. "What do I say?" Helen adjusted the girl's fingers around the switch. "Say who you are, say where you are, then wait like the answer matters." Lacey swallowed and pressed transmit. "This is Pine Hollow Training Station, relay check." Static answered first. The old familiar hiss filled the room. Then a voice came through from Mason County, faint but clear. "Pine Hollow, we copy." Lacey looked at Helen with wide eyes. Helen nodded. Around the room, people smiled, but no one laughed. On a shelf beside the console sat 3 things: Paul's maintenance notebook, a sealed copy of the 43 logs, and Samuel Pike's photograph in a plain wooden frame. Not behind museum glass. Not under a plaque. Close enough for students to see before they touched the microphone. The tower had been called dead for years. Helen never corrected them. She only waited until the living were ready to hear what the dead had left behind.